The Council's grave mistake. The Central Galactic Council chamber stood in perfect silence, a vast and gleaming hall where decisions that shaped the universe were made. Delegates from 100 alien species sat in a perfect half-circle, their seats towering above the chamber floor. Some were encased in shimmering force fields to contain their ethereal bodies. Others stood upright in exoskeleton suits built for their fragile forms, while the plant-like Malorians swayed gently, their leaves rustling as they absorbed the light filtering in from the artificial star above. At the center of it all, standing on the cold metallic floor, was Ambassador Elias Carter, representing the United Earth Federation. Beside him stood Dr. Marina Vos, a leading scientist in human exobiology, her fingers twitching slightly on the tablet she held. Unlike the alien delegates who gazed down at them with unreadable expressions, Elias and Marina were exposed, standing without protection, without barriers. It was a statement. Humanity had nothing to hide. The tension in the room was palpable. The council speaker, a towering Thrixian with deep violet scales and 4 curling horns, finally stepped forward, his voice a low, guttural vibration that resonated through the chamber. The matter of Earth's inclusion into the Galactic Federation has been deliberated upon. After thorough review of your species' biological composition, we regret to inform you that a sharp buzz from the chamber's AI system interrupted the speech, drawing all attention to the holographic display hovering above the floor. Red alerts flashed across the screen, and an unfamiliar warning glyph blinked erratically. The assembled delegates shifted uneasily, their antennae twitching, bioluminescent pulses dimming, or their crystalline bodies vibrating in response. Marina stiffened. Something was wrong. Warning. High levels of hazardous biological compounds detected. Atmospheric contamination imminent. A wave of horror swept through the chamber. A Veric scientist, whose energy-based body flickered like living stardust, screamed in a frequency so high-pitched that the walls trembled. A Malorian elder collapsed, its leaves turning an unnatural shade of gray. The insectoid Thrixians recoiled, their sensory appendages curling inward, as if shielding themselves from an invisible threat. Security droids rushed forward, their plasma weapons primed. Elias and Marina stood frozen in place. "Cease movement," barked the lead enforcer, a towering reptilian warrior clad in dark metallic armor. "The Earth delegation is emitting a hazardous presence. Initiate quarantine protocol." The air shimmered as a containment field slammed into place, sealing the humans inside an invisible energy barrier. For a few agonizing moments, nothing moved. Elias slowly raised his hands, his voice even but firm. "Council members, there is no contamination. This is a misunderstanding." His words fell on deaf ears. The Malorian delegate wheezed, pointing a gnarled root-like limb at them. "Your kind breathes a poison that destroys us." Marina's eyes widened. Oxygen. They were talking about oxygen. Her mind raced. No, that's not possible. We ran the numbers. Oxygen is a reactive gas, but it's not lethal at these levels, unless... The horrifying realization struck all at once. The majority of species in the Galactic Federation had evolved in low-oxygen environments. To them, oxygen wasn't just foreign, it was lethal. A highly corrosive, reactive element that damaged organic structures on contact. Their biology had never adapted to handle its oxidative effects. And yet, here stood 2 humans, breathing it in with ease. To the Galactic Council, they were walking bioweapons. Marina swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elias, they think we're a plague." The silence was shattered by the Thrixian delegate's roar. "Seal them away." The human problem. The chaos that followed was swift and absolute. The council floor erupted in frantic discussions, panicked warnings, and desperate calculations. To the assembled species, the presence of oxygen-breathing beings was an immediate threat to their safety. Elias and Marina watched as the security droids closed in, their weapons armed. The air became thick with fear. "Listen to me," Elias said sharply, forcing his voice to cut through the rising panic. "We are not a danger to you. Oxygen is not a toxin. It is simply the foundation of our biology, just as nitrogen is to yours." But they weren't listening. The Malorian elder's bioluminescence flickered erratically. "Your presence disrupts the balance. You must be isolated before your breath corrupts our worlds." Marina took a shaky breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Elias," she whispered, her eyes locked onto the oxygen level indicator flashing on her datapad. Their air supply was running out. The quarantine field that had snapped into place wasn't just keeping others safe from them. It was suffocating them. Elias clenched his jaw. He had spent years preparing for this moment, studying galactic law, learning the cultural nuances of every species present, perfecting diplomatic strategies that would ensure Earth's integration into the Federation. And yet, one fundamental mistake had shattered everything. No one had considered how toxic humanity would seem. "We don't have much time," Marina whispered. "We have about 12 hours before we suffocate in our own containment." Elias exhaled slowly. 12 hours. 12 hours to convince an entire intergalactic council that oxygen was not the end of them. 12 hours to stop humanity from being exiled, or worse, exterminated. The desperate gambit. Elias steeled himself and turned to the High Council. "If you see us as a threat, then you are making a mistake." His voice was clear, unwavering. "I suggest you review the data before you doom yourselves to ignorance." The Thrixian delegate growled. "What data?" Marina activated her datapad and projected a massive holographic display into the chamber. Detailed biochemical breakdowns of oxygen interactions across various species flooded the air. "Oxygen is not just a corrosive gas," she said urgently. "It is the foundation of Earth's medical and technological advancements. Controlled exposure could revolutionize your industries, your medicine, your power sources. You fear us because you do not understand us. But what if our greatest threat to you is also your greatest opportunity?" Silence. A tense, fragile silence. The Varick scientist, who had recoiled in fear minutes earlier, drifted closer, its pulsating energy shifting to a more stable frequency. "Your kind has harnessed a toxin, as life," it murmured, its voice crackling like an electric storm. "This is unprecedented." Marina nodded. "Let us prove it." Elias glanced at the council members, reading their expressions. Fear was still there, but so was curiosity. That was the opening they needed. A single chance to turn fear into opportunity. Humanity's impossible bargain. The quarantine field hummed softly, its transparent barrier an unbreakable wall between the humans and the rest of the Galactic Council. Beyond it, alien delegates whispered in hushed, frantic tones, their antennae twitching, their exoskeletons vibrating, their bioluminescent pulses flashing erratically in their own strange languages. Elias Carter stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask, but his mind raced at impossible speeds. 12 hours. That was all the time they had left before the air within their containment pod was exhausted. The oxygen that had kept them alive their entire lives was now a death sentence, not because it was gone, but because it was feared. Dr. Marina Vos tapped furiously on her holopad, compiling data at a reckless speed. If they were going to convince the Galactic Council that oxygen wasn't a universal poison, they needed more than words. They needed proof. The unfolding crisis. "This is absurd." The Thrixian delegate slammed a clawed hand on the armrest of his hovering council seat, his violet scales darkening with frustration. "How can we even consider this discussion? These creatures radiate toxic breath with every passing second. They must be contained or expelled, before their presence destabilizes our ecosystems." A chorus of fearful agreements rippled through the chamber. "This conversation is reckless," barked a Malorian elder, his bark-like skin cracking as his leaves curled inwards, a sign of distress. "If their atmosphere seeps into our stations, our crops will wilt, our ecosystems will collapse. We have survived without oxygen for eons. We do not need their so-called advancements. We need them gone." The words stung, but Elias had expected nothing less. Fear had always been the greatest enemy of diplomacy. He exchanged a glance with Marina. The fear in the chamber wasn't just a reaction. It was biological survival instinct. They weren't afraid of war. They weren't afraid of humanity's technology. They were afraid to breathe. And that was something neither words nor reason could easily erase. "You call us dangerous," Elias finally spoke, his voice calm yet unyielding. "You see us as a plague, but you have not once considered that your very survival could be hidden in what you fear." The council chamber fell silent. It was the Varick scientist, the one made of pure, crackling energy, who drifted forward, its glowing form shimmering faintly. "Explain." Marina didn't hesitate. She projected a new set of holographic biochemical schematics into the air. "We understand your fear," she said. "Oxygen, to you, is corrosive. It damages the molecular bonds of species that evolved in nitrogen, methane, or carbon dioxide-based environments. But what if?" She paused, her heart pounding. "What if you could control it, harness it?" A visible ripple of unease passed through the council chamber. "Impossible," murmured the Malorian elder. "Oxygen is destruction. It has no place among us." "No," Marina countered sharply. "It is not just destruction. It is a catalyst. And in controlled doses, it could be your salvation." She expanded the holographic projection, zooming in on a specific set of alien DNA samples, some from Thrixians, some from Malorians, some from Varick energy beings. Then she overlaid oxygen molecules in simulated interactions. The results were shocking. Instead of instant cellular decay, some of the models showed enhanced metabolic efficiency. A few of the more complex alien life forms exhibited accelerated tissue regeneration, even improved energy production in certain synthetic constructs. Gasps of disbelief and anger spread through the chamber. "You lie." The Thrixian delegate's mandibles snapped in agitation. "Your science is manipulated. A trick to lure us into vulnerability." Elias felt the weight of history pressing down on them. He knew that the council didn't trust humanity yet, but this wasn't about trust. It was about survival. "Then let us prove it," he said firmly. The chamber froze. Elias took a step forward, his hand still raised in a gesture of peace. "I propose an experiment." The murmurs turned to outright chaos. The gamble of a lifetime. It took nearly an hour for the room to settle, for the council to silence its own infighting. Finally, a new figure emerged, a high-ranking Thrixian scientist with a deep, ancient gaze that betrayed centuries of wisdom. "What do you propose, human?" The alien's voice was calculated. Marina steeled herself. "A controlled exposure test," she said. "In a safe, sterile environment, we introduce minute amounts of purified oxygen to select biological samples from your species. We monitor the reaction in real time. If there is any evidence of harm, we stop immediately." Elias locked eyes with the Thrixian delegate. "If our proposal is wrong," he said, "then we will accept Earth's rejection from the Council. We will leave this chamber, and we will never return." The chamber held its breath. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Varick scientist floated forward, its glowing form flickering with curiosity. "You stake your place in the galaxy on this gamble." "We do," Elias said without hesitation. A strange silence followed. Then, to everyone's shock, the Thrixian delegate nodded. "Very well, human. We accept your challenge." A sharp wave of tension crackled through the air. The experiment begins. Less than an hour later, a separate biosecure chamber was prepared within the Council's vast research station. Enclosed behind multiple layers of quarantine shielding, Marina and Elias stood with their research equipment as the first test subject entered. It was the Varick scientist. The being of pure energy hovered within the sterile chamber, seemingly fearless. "Proceed," it said. Marina took a slow breath. With careful precision, She released a single microdose of purified oxygen into the chamber. The reaction was instant. The Varric's form flickered violently, its energy distorting, then stabilizing. Elias held his breath. Fascinating, the Varric murmured. Its glow grew stronger. The energy within me is heightened, more efficient. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the observing council members. Marina felt her hands tremble. They had just witnessed the impossible. The experiment was a success. The turning point. By the end of the next testing cycle, 3 more species had participated, each with varied reactions. Some saw no effect, while others displayed minor regenerative boosts. But the fear in the chamber had begun to change. It was no longer fear of humans. It was fear of possibility. If oxygen could be controlled, could it be weaponized? If humans had lived with it for millennia, what else were they capable of? Elias saw the way the council members were now staring at them, and he realized something far worse than rejection was taking shape. Humanity was no longer viewed as a threat to be cast out. Now, they were a resource to be controlled, and the real battle was about to begin. The price of survival. The controlled experiment had changed everything. The Galactic Council chamber no longer buzzed with fear, but something far more dangerous: calculation. Humanity was no longer viewed as an unstable threat, but as something valuable, something to be exploited. Elias Carter could see it in their eyes. The shift had been almost instantaneous. The moment the Varric scientist had stabilized and strengthened under a controlled dose of oxygen, the entire perception of humanity had flipped on its head. The Council had no interest in understanding humans. They wanted to control them. Dr. Marina Vos stood beside Elias, her face tight with unease, as she reviewed the latest data. The oxygen trials had proven humanity's point. Oxygen wasn't just a poison, it was a tool. And now that the aliens understood that, the game had changed entirely. The Council no longer wanted humans gone. They wanted them regulated, possessed, harvested. Elias clenched his fists. They had just escaped exile, only to walk straight into a cage. A dangerous proposition. Ambassador Carter, the Thrixian delegate, spoke, his mandibles clicking in precise calculation. After careful consideration, the Council has come to a new conclusion regarding your species. Elias didn't move. He already knew what was coming. Given your unique biological composition, humanity is now classified as a Category 1 strategic resource. The entire chamber murmured in agreement. Elias felt his stomach drop. A resource, not a species, not an ally, not an equal. A resource. As such, the Thrixian continued, we propose a mutually beneficial arrangement. Humanity will supply carefully regulated quantities of Earth's oxygen to be distributed across the Federation under strict oversight. Elias' eyes narrowed. Under whose oversight? The Thrixian's mandibles curled slightly in amusement. The Galactic Council, of course. Given the unpredictable nature of your species, it is only logical that we maintain direct control over the flow of oxygen to ensure its safe application. Marina stiffened. You want to control our planet's atmosphere. The Thrixian made a soft clicking sound, as if mocking their concern. Not all of it, of course, only what is necessary for intergalactic trade. Earth would remain self-sufficient, provided it meets the Council's environmental regulations. Elias exhaled slowly, keeping his expression calm, even as his mind raced. They weren't offering a partnership. They were annexing Earth's oxygen supply under the guise of safety regulations. This was colonization, but through resources, not weapons. And it was far more dangerous. Because if humanity agreed to this, they would become dependent on the Council's approval for every breath they took. If we refuse? Elias asked, his voice neutral. The chamber fell silent. It was the Varric scientist who finally answered, its energy flickering with subtle menace. Then humanity will be classified as an unregulated hazardous entity. A death sentence. Marina paled beside him. They had two choices: accept servitude or face extermination. Elias exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch. He had played enough political games to know that there was always a third option, but it would take careful maneuvering. "We understand the Council's concerns," Elias said, choosing his words carefully. "However, humanity has no intention of surrendering control over its own biology. If oxygen is to become a strategic resource, then Earth must oversee its own distribution." The Thrixian delegate let out a low guttural growl. "You expect us to trust you?" Elias smiled coldly. "You already breathe the air we exhale." The chamber darkened with tension. The Council was not used to being challenged. But this was not a battle of weapons. It was a battle of dependency. And Elias had just reminded them that the Council needed humans more than humans needed them. A galaxy held hostage. The negotiations stretched for hours, with neither side willing to give ground. But the underlying reality was clear. Humanity had leverage. The Council had already seen what oxygen could do. The Varick scientist had grown stronger under it. The Malorian healers had accelerated plant growth in controlled doses. And the more they experimented, the more the potential of oxygen became undeniable. But only humans could produce it safely. Only humans could harvest it effectively. If the Council pushed too hard, if they alienated Earth, they would lose access to something they now desired. And that gave Elias the power to bargain. The Council's decision. Hours later, the final agreement was reluctantly drafted. Earth would retain control over its own oxygen distribution. The Galactic Council could purchase regulated supplies, but only through direct trade agreements. Humans would not be classified as a strategic resource, but as a sovereign species within the Federation. The final terms were not perfect, but they were a victory. Elias knew that the Council was furious. They had wanted dominion over humanity. Instead, they had been forced into an equal exchange. For now. But as Elias stepped out of the chamber, he could feel it. A storm brewing beneath the surface. The Council had accepted the terms today, but they would not forget that they had been outmaneuvered. The war for control over humanity was far from over, and Elias knew that the next battle would not be fought in negotiation rooms. It would be fought in the shadows. It would be fought in secrets, in espionage, in whispered alliances, and silent betrayals. Because now that humanity had proven its worth, the galaxy would never stop trying to take it away. And Elias Carter was going to make damn sure that never happened. The Shadow War begins. The ink on the treaty had barely dried when the first whispers of betrayal began. Elias Carter knew this would happen. He could see it in the stiff posture of the Thrixian delegate, in the too polite nods of the Malorian elders, in the way the Varick scientist pulsed with silent energy, calculating, always calculating. The Galactic Council had agreed to the terms, but they had not accepted them. They were simply waiting for the right moment to strike back. And that moment was coming faster than anyone expected. The first incident. It started with a supply shipment. One of Earth's first official oxygen exports, a carefully sealed cargo of purified O2, bound for a Varick research facility on the distant colony world of Saltoran 5. The transport ship had barely exited Earth's solar system when it vanished without a trace. No distress calls, no navigation beacons, just radio silence. The Council called it an accident. Elias called it a warning. And then it happened again. A second oxygen transport disappeared, this time over a Malorian trade route. The official reports claimed it had been destroyed by a gravitational anomaly. Elias didn't buy it. Someone was sabotaging Earth's shipments. Someone was testing humanity's response. And if he didn't act fast, Earth was about to lose everything it had just fought for. The hunt for the enemy. Back on Earth, Dr. Marina Vos was working tirelessly to trace the lost shipments. "We need hard evidence," she muttered, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "If we can prove sabotage, we can force a diplomatic investigation." Elias nodded, watching the data scroll across the screen. "And if we can't?" Marina didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. Without evidence, the Council would twist the narrative. They would say that Earth was unstable, that it couldn't be trusted to handle its own oxygen trade. They would take control anyway, this time, under the pretense of stabilization. Elias clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to let that happen. Find me something. The betrayal within. They found the first traitor 2 days later. It wasn't a Thrixian, or a Malorian, or even a Varric. It was a human. A scientist named Dr. Alan Thorne, a specialist in oxygen refinement, assigned to oversee one of Earth's new atmospheric processing stations. When they arrested him, he was caught uploading encrypted files to an unknown off-world transmission node. Elias stood in front of the containment cell, staring at the man through the reinforced energy barrier. "Tell me who you're working for." Dr. Thorne smirked. "You already know." Elias didn't move. He didn't blink. Because yes, he did know. The Council. The same people who had signed the treaty, who had pretended to accept Earth's sovereignty. They had never intended to let humanity control its own oxygen. They had just been biding their time, setting up pieces, waiting for the moment to make their move. "How much have you given them?" Elias asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Thorne chuckled. "Enough." Elias stepped closer. "Do you know what happens next?" Thorne tilted his head. "You put me in a cell, you make some grand speech about humanity's future, and then the Council comes knocking with a perfectly legal demand for my release. Maybe they even offer you compensation. They'd win, you lose." Elias smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made Dr. Thorne's smirk disappear. "No," Elias said softly. "You're going to disappear. Right now. Without a trace." For the first time, fear flickered across Thorne's face. "You can't." "Watch me," Elias said. The cell door slid open. 2 security officers stepped inside, grabbing Thorne by the arms. "Wait, wait, wait, wait." He struggled. "You can't just." Elias leaned in. "Do you really think I care about what I can and can't do anymore?" The door hissed shut. Dr. Alan Thorne was never seen again. The silent war begins. Elias turned back to Marina. "How many more?" She looked pale. "We don't know. The leak could be much bigger than Thorne." Elias clenched his jaw. The Council wasn't attacking Earth with ships or weapons. They were corrupting it from the inside, buying off scientists, disrupting supply chains, staging accidents to create fear. It was the perfect strategy. Because if Earth fought back too openly, the Council would label them as unstable and reckless, and use it as an excuse to take control. If Earth did nothing, the Council would slowly suffocate them, cutting off oxygen trade little by little, ensuring that humanity became dependent on them instead of the other way around. They were tightening the noose, and Elias refused to let them. "We need to go dark," he said. Marina frowned. "What do you mean?" "We stop playing by their rules." Elias's eyes burned with determination. "If they want to sabotage us in the shadows, then we fight them in the dark. No more diplomatic channels. No more official negotiations." Marina hesitated. "You're talking about a war." Elias nodded. "Yes, but not the kind they expect." Marina took a slow breath. "Then we'd better make the first move. The first strike." That night, an unregistered shuttle launched from Earth's atmosphere under false identification codes. Its destination: a classified oxygen refinery on Europa, where a second traitor had been found, one with ties to the Varric delegation. The orders were simple: no trials, no evidence, no survivors. By the time the Council realized what was happening, it was already too late. The refinery was gone. The traitors were gone. And the message was clear. Humanity was not going to be controlled. They were not going to be manipulated. And if the Council thought they could win this war in the shadows, they had underestimated the darkness humanity was willing to step into.